Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass into the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
I'm Adam Luke. We've spent years helping others navigate the complexities of their minds and relationships.
In this podcast, we're flipping the script, and we're sharing our own unfiltered insights. No topic is off limits, and no issue too taboo. We're ready to tackle the tough stuff with honesty and empathy. Let's dive in.
It was Infinity Wars all over again. Everyone was coming to play, my friend.
Oh my God. Yeah, it wasn't ride or die. It was ride and die. Like, it was till the end. We're chatting about the last episode. It was very good about cheating.
Yeah, it seemed like it resonated with a lot of you. I got a lot of text messages. I got a lot of direct messages.
Where's the episode?
like, where is it? Is there a part 3? Yeah. I think this one goes into part 3. We're switching it up. We don't need to just be on the cheater bash mode. I think
it was fun while it lasted.
It was. I appreciate hearing from some of you, like the relationships that you're getting over. And there was one direct message that I was like, "That's brave." And essentially, this individual said, after my last relationship, there's nothing that Chris Hemsworth reels and batteries can't get me through. And I was like, that's
iconic,
extremely clarifying.
Yes.
And so like, okay. Yeah. And so this is where this topic comes from, is it's lonely at the top and how too much self-reliance leads to isolation.
I really want to make the pun, it's lonely on top. Which it
Valid.
Can be. Which it can be, but I'd rather it be lonely at the top than lonely on top. So our episode topic for the day was birthed, if you will, from what Adam and I have been talking to our clients about, and this theme of why is asking for help a struggle at times, and why does extreme self-reliance lead to isolation. So I had our dear friend ChatGPT write this little summary for us so we could lay the foundation, and then we have a few points that we're going to hit today. So this is already, I think, common knowledge, but it's a great summary. Hyper-independent people who are accustomed to doing everything themselves and often taking care of others tend to struggle with asking for help. Why, you ask? This is because they may view self-reliance as a source of strength and pride, making them reluctant to depend on others. Additionally, they may fear being seen as a burden or feel vulnerable when seeking assistance. I can totally relate to that. And not want to be disappointed. Their identity may be tied, spoiler alert, definitely is tied to their ability to handle everything alone, leading to discomfort or guilt when considering delegating or relying on others, even when and especially when they genuinely need the support. So we're going to cover the struggle of asking for help. Is it because no one does it the way that you would? You don't want to be disappointed. There's other themes there. What are the limiting beliefs and potential low self-worth causes and concerns that cause it? And then what do we do when we want more for ourselves than others are willing to accept or want for themselves? I think that's a really key one. And that's your area of expertise. So I'll let you take the floor and we can start talking about why people struggle asking for help.
So I will say, like, this episode is one of those episodes where it also is almost like I'm doing this episode for me, right? Like a lot of what I'm going to talk about has come through my own work. With a therapist, with a coach, like just sort of dragging this out of why is this such like a core theme in my life.
Yes.
And one, I want to just throw this out here so that we're all on the same page. The struggle to ask for help actually starts as a trauma response. So what we're doing is we're like hedging bets. We're basically saying, I don't want to feel abandoned. I don't want to feel discarded. I don't want to experience rejection. So I can actually like circumvent all of that from happening if I never ask for help. Because then I don't have to navigate when someone says they can't make themselves present, or they don't make themselves present. Or they tell me they're going to show up and then they don't show up. Because I can just rely on me, because I have been the most consistent presence in my own life, I would hope. Right? The challenge in this, though, is that this is where that natural self-editing process happens, where it starts to become very lonely.
Yeah.
So I'll also say that people who go into this spot, because it is a trauma response, end up also being people that simultaneously love people and relationships. It's just we've been hurt by them in the
Yeah.
past in such a way that like what we crave is also we won't give ourselves.
Yes. That's something I'm exploring in my own therapy now. My therapist put it that I need to work on having receiving
Mm,
feel as natural or good as giving. And I think that is apropos for what we're talking about
yeah.
today, that when we do become, I don't know what the opposite of like like a do-it-all is. Like, it's not a people pleaser, it's like a do-it-all, like a
Mm,
self-reliant, hyper independent, like
yeah.
I'm not gonna, I'm like lone wolfing it, maybe is like the word I'm
Mhm.
looking for. That I would rather also people depend on me or rely on me or let me do it my way.
Yeah.
In many ways, like, just if we're looking at it behaviorally, like sometimes it is easier if you do it yourself.
Mm,
However, if you have to do everything on your plate all by yourself and in the way that you want it done, that's where I think the scales tip into where it's overwhelm. And understandably, it's
mm,
easier to delegate before things are like on fire, right? Like,
mhm,
let's delegate it before that happens. But if that is the case where you don't delegate until that happens, setting more realistic expectations around what is the
mm,
purpose, how, not only how do I ask for help, what's the purpose of asking for help? And
yeah.
that's that deep core belief, which
Mm,
we'll talk about core beliefs later on. It's that deep core belief. Not only what if I ask somebody and they disappoint me, how do I tolerate that? And can I have a backup plan? And then one could argue that's even more of a
yeah.
mental load to then think of a backup plan. It's easier to just do it myself. And in many cases it is. But the
Mm,
real fear, I think, the real root of the shadow work is at times, what if the person does it and I don't have the role of being hyper independent and a do it all anymore?
yeah.
Like, who am I if I have all that time, not all, but like, who am I if
Mm,
I have some more free time, free space, and I'm not doing it all, feeling that urge or that urgency that often comes from the trauma
yeah.
response, that I can't be at rest or something's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think you called it out right there when you talk about this availability of space or time being present for us. The hiccup is the fact that it's almost like we're being pushed into self-discovery, and we
Mm,
don't like self-discovery. We like to have sort of an absolutist mindset of like, I know how everything works. That rigidity gives me a sense of control and purpose in of itself.
yeah.
And so the idea of unburdening me, giving myself quiet time, that's scary because if I actually get my life to be quiet enough, I might actually hear different voices than what I currently hear. Like the
True.
things that are my drivers, are those voices actually based in what's good for me, like seeking out joy, seeking out relationship, or are the primary voices of my life obligation, anxiety,
Mm,
fear, um, anger,
mm-hmm.
and I think that if we're being honest, those are the voices that drive a lot of our decisions more than seeking out joy, seeking out collaboration, fellowship, relationships. We love to start from what seems like the greatest risk, and that's where fear, anger, and disappointment and obligation are going to exist.
Mm-hmm. And I think on the flip side of those emotions, if we were praised for being successful or
Yeah.
obedient or compliant or well behaved or achievement oriented, anything
Mm,
on those lists growing up, this might be a clunky way to word it. It's not necessarily a trauma response in terms of a how we typically define trauma.
mm,
It's more of a automatic response. That praise isn't necessarily traumatic, but it is impactful, and it rewires the brain in such a way that we orient more towards what behavior did I do
yeah.
preceding the praise or preceding the extra hour of screen time or the extra scoop of
Yeah.
ice cream or getting a sleepover because I kept my room clean, whatever it might have been growing up. That becomes internalized, not so much as a trauma response where I talked about it on a different podcast, the feeling when you hear the garage door open and you're immediately up and cleaning stuff because God forbid you'd be sitting there on the couch resting if there's one
Yeah.
thing to be done. That definitely comes from our childhood of like, I need to be just so. That opposite, that pride piece is also true, that I'm now seeking external validation and seeking connection by way of being performative in other people's lives by
Yeah.
not only being so self-reliant that I never ask for help, but simultaneously I'm always available to help you. That's like that's the loneliest lonely at the top, the peak echelon of like, no, I'm literally the most helpful to everyone and I simultaneously don't need anyone. Look at me
Yeah.
go. Like, I've been there, current president of that club. It really does take a village to help that
Mhm.
thought process to deconstruct and to unpack and go, where is this coming from for me? So the limiting belief might not just be negative, or the
Mm.
struggling to ask for help because nobody does it your way. That has to be a foregone conclusion. No one will ever do something the exact way that you
Yep.
do it. The closest thing that you'll get is if you pay someone. Like the time that
Yeah.
somebody is motivated to do something the way that you want it is if they're going to get something from you in return, or a unwanted behavior is going to stop in return. But most of the time it's if the reward comes. And that's where a lot of the
Wow.
moms that I've worked with feel like they can rely on a housekeeper or a nanny more than
Mm.
they can rely on their significant other, because that, and then of course the husband is like, well, it's just because they're another woman and they're more nurturing. I'm like, no, it's because they're literally getting paid. Like, they do it because they care. They're not a bad nanny or a bad housekeeper, but they're doing it because it's an income, but they also take pride in their work. So there's two pieces of it. And now I'm not saying like pay your husband for chores. That's not what I'm insinuating by this like asking for help. It's like,
And the
if, yeah,
mail. The
listenership
mail
has dropped
listenership
off.
dropped off.
No, this is for both, right? If you're asking me for help, right? There's a lot of guys who refuse to let on to their wives that they have a struggle at work or anything is
Yeah.
not completely like all
Mm.
successful all the time, and they're struggling, but we wouldn't know because it gets sublimated or put into these other areas, and then a blow up happens, and then all of a sudden all this truth comes out, and it's not that maybe we could help you with what's going on at work,
Mm.
but if you let me know, then I won't ask you for as much help with the kids, right? Like, that help
Mm.
might look like I'll lay off my requests, but if you show up and
Yeah.
I don't know anything's wrong, that might also be why we're both struggling to ask for help, because you're
Absolutely.
not showing me the real you, and you also wouldn't do it the way that I would. I think that's a key piece too.
Yeah, just going back to what you said, something I think that the reason why these relationships that are formed, that are like professional relationships, why they thrive so much
Hmm.
better, is those relationships started from the point of them being transactional in nature.
And clear
Well,
boundaries and
clear boundaries,
expectations.
and there's not a built-in resentment around the transactional nature of it.
No,
So,
exactly.
the reason why at times, this isn't a permission slip, but whatever significant other is sitting there and is saying like, "Well, you haven't given my cookie. I don't know what the cookie is." And let's
Yeah.
not just go to physical intimacy.
No.
There's other things there,
Yes.
but a need was promised to me, and the need is not being given to me,
Yeah.
and now I'm expected to meet one of your needs. There's inherent like hesitation already there. The resistance is there
Hmm.
because one is saying, "Well, I already feel extorted, or I
Yeah.
feel like I've already been put into a position of vulnerability, and nothing happened. So why would I then go into it?" And this is where you hear me talk all the time about hedging bets. This is where people are starting to make those assumptions of, well, if I do this, will you do that?
Yeah.
And
Quid pro
so,
quo.
I mean, this is also that reason why a lot of us will go silent, because it's again easy to not be extorted and not have things expected of us if we start doing things by ourselves. So
Yes, and
if I don't,
I know I can rely on me. I don't know if I can rely on others, or I've learned along the way I can't rely on others, whether that was my parents or a teacher or a grandparent, right? And sometimes it just takes one or two memories,
absolutely.
right? Like, were you there for me when I needed you? Did you show up when I needed you? Yes or no? And it only takes, again, especially from primary caregivers and those core influential people, it really can only take a few times where that did not happen for the
Mm,
tone to be set. This is not safe. I can't reach out. I don't want to get close, not necessarily because I fear vulnerability.
mm,
That's sometimes part of it for people, but it's I don't actually want to be close because what if you what if you do what I want and then you end up leaving? Or what if you never do what I want and there's this perpetual cycle of I'm standing here, right? It's like the parable
mm,
of the guy who's stranded at sea, and he's praying to God, like, God, come rescue me. God said, with a story, like the boat, the canoe, the this, the that. He eventually dies and meets God in heaven, and God's like, what gives? I'm paraphrasing very loosely. And he goes, I
Yeah.
asked for your help. He goes, I sent you so many opportunities to help yourself. Well, I wanted you. Right. And that's I think, to learn from that lesson, how are you asking for help?
Yeah.
Are you clearly explaining what the benefit would be, or that you're okay if it's not perfect, if that's
Mm,
true? Or is it just explaining the consequences of or else? Is it the parenting based off, I think, injunctions versus permissions is what it's called.
mm,
Injunctions are like, no, don't, stop, everything that's no, which the
yeah.
subconscious mind when you're young cannot process. And some of us
Mm-mm.
have that infant like state still in adulthood, can't process. Or are we encouraging and saying what could happen? What is the most positive
Uh,
outcome? And that's the, I think, for struggling to ask for help, there's sometimes where it's like, but this isn't just my job. And that's a whole
mm,
other episode when it comes to romantic relationships, so I'm not going down that tangent now. I just want to make note of
mm,
that. The word help implies that it's my role that you are assisting me with, but it still is
mm,
ultimately on my plate. And I think that's sometimes why people struggle to ask for
yeah.
help, because they're like, I never wanted this, I was defaulted to this role,
Mm,
unlike in corporate structures or in other friendship structures where you navigate. Let's say I love going on trips and you love planning trips. Great
mm,
team, right? I can tell you what to do while we're there, but you might be the itinerary person and do all the research. We both collaborate, but if we're
yeah.
friends, or that's my job to be your travel agent, I don't have
Mhm,
the added pressure of going on the trip with you. Did you actually like it? I
mhm,
hear about it at the end, but then I'm not also navigating the kids, the
mm,
romance. Did we have enough sex on this trip? Did we, that, like, that muddies the waters when a romantic relationship has all that pressure. Whereas you're saying those professional relationships, it's different because there's a contract in place at the outset, and if neither of you like it, you could quit or fire the person. Like, it's very easy.
It's very easy, and it also brings in the fact that grace is not built into a professional contract, right? Like,
Yeah.
and this is why we like hiring people to do things, right?
Yes.
Or when we ask for help, there actually is grace in there because at times I'm going to disappoint my wife when I am asked to provide help, and I think I've provided help, and I actually didn't do it the right way, or I didn't meet her expectation, or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go immediately to the negative emotion
Mm-mm.
of like, oh, well, it was a failure, or I should be shamed, or whatever it is. But this is why, again, we almost invite sterility into our relationships, and we start treating relationships like they're business agreements. I see this a lot with my older couples that they've launched kids, they've gotten to the promised land, right? Like they're about to cash in the 401ks, the house is paid for, all this stuff. They look at each other and they say, I have no idea who you are. Or we have an agreement, we don't have a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, well, we now don't have even the social pressures of like, why not to have sex at noon on a Thursday? Like,
Right.
we're home,
Yeah.
we have an empty house, let's go for it. But there's this built-in hesitation. That hesitation is normally about the fact that like emotionally this relationship has been on a ration.
Mm.
And so emotionally you guys aren't there. That would be extremely weird to all of a sudden be required to have emotional intimacy or physical intimacy with someone that I've been collaborating with on more of business agreements than something that's actually a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to understand that when you have your primary relationship, or friendships,
Yeah.
or like the people closest to you, ironically, that might be the area that you struggle to ask for
Mm,
help the most, because the risk of the disappointment would hurt far more than if you are, the best example I can think of that's like low stakes. When I used to teach DBT groups, I would teach like the spheres of influence
yeah.
and the closeness. So like your mailman, the UPS guy, maybe I see the same one twice, but like that's not a
Yeah.
close relationship where if
No.
I had to advocate or ask for help or give constructive feedback, like, you
Mm,
deliver my mail late every time, can you please, like, is something, first of all, as a person, like, is something going on in your life? Like, not to be your therapist, but like, I want to make sure I'm not just going to lay into you if like you're going through some
yeah.
stuff. If that's not the case, be better. Like, take your ADHD meds and be better. But that's not a sphere of influence of a person that I would be so worried to be like, I need your help with this. Like, what is going on? Do your job. Versus the closer that you get to somebody where there's more
Yeah.
stakes involved, it is harder to ask for help, because if they don't, the felt sense of disappointment when somebody who should be there
Mhm.
for you lets you down hurts a lot more than somebody where it's, again, their job or it's not as influential of a role. Okay, then I just won't go to you again. It's like the friends who only reach out when they want something or need something. I'm sure we all have had those, or have experience with that. At first of all, I admire their directness. I like the ones who are just like, "Hey, hope you've been well," the polite thing. Anyway, what I was wondering if you had blah blah blah. I don't love it because it feels transactional, but in the same way, I respect the fact that they're not doing this fake lead up that we've all experienced for other people too. Oh, and it's this and it's that. Could you just get to the point? Oh, no, I didn't really want that. Don't pussyfoot around it. Just like be direct and ask, and know that that person might say no. That's the other piece sometimes when asking for help, is that it's asked in such a way that the person who is being asked feels sometimes like there's no other way out, so they default to saying yes even though they really mean no. They're not a person of their word, sometimes because they're wishy-washy, but sometimes because they want to emotionally rescue the other person from the disappointment, or they overestimate their workload and say yes, I can do that, or they say yes but don't give a specific time. All of those things lead kind of more down the disappointment route, which guides us into those limiting beliefs and the low self-worth aspect of this conversation in this episode. That when you have the limiting belief based on evidence that this pattern of asking for help will not be met with actually having help, the first thing I recommend clients do is look at how you're asking. Are you being clear? Are you being direct? Like a SMART goal with my supervisees. Like, do you have it clearly laid out where the person knows what you're asking and when you expect it by? So then you can take the pressure off of it's not how I'm asking. And if it is how you're asking, doing more assertiveness training would help. The second piece of that is, okay, I'm asking clearly, then who are you asking? How and who? Then who are you asking? Are you asking somebody who has a track record of being unreliable or not responsible, expecting you to be whatever, the special person that they're finally responsible to? That's a lot of shadow work to do. Or are you asking somebody who 9 out of 10 times does what you want, but maybe the 1 out of 10 times they don't? You could probably write that one off. So I think the how are you asking and who are you asking is kind of that core of the limiting beliefs and self-worth part of this episode. What would you say?
I agree with you. It's interesting because normally with this individual, they go two ways. And I wish that there were like, many different ways. No, there's normally two. There's either I'm not struggling with an inherent self-worth issue. And what I mean by that is they don't see themselves as a burden. They tell themselves they don't care.
Yeah.
And that's not actually true. So there is a self-worth issue there.
Yes.
It's just they're not like sort of wallowing in self-doubt. Like they're
correct.
It's just like, and I think that's a trauma response. Like, I don't have time to sit and worry about what other people think about me because I'm trying to find out where I'm going to get fed next.
Right.
And so we just like weaponize that survival mindset and we move forward. What's interesting is that then you do have people that are extremely like, how do I want to say this? They can do anything. They've got the grit. They've got the resiliency. They're great at being self-starters. They're great at picking their own direction. But then they do have this belief that if they were to reach out, that they are a burden to others.
Yes.
Like these are the people that will literally, they're supermen in the and women in their spheres of influence. Someone has a problem, they call them, they fix that problem for that person. No problem at all. That same person then has a problem in their sphere of influence and they will call no one because they feel like they will burden everyone else by asking them to show up in ways that this person has shown up for others.
Yes.
Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships. You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self-worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating. It's about understanding the core beliefs that drive your relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewire your relationships or check the link in the show notes for more.
You know, you kicked it off before we got on to doing the podcast today of like, you're actually robbing other people of the experience of proving to you how much you actually mean in their life and what they are actually willing and capable of doing in providing you assistance.
Mm-hmm. And one of the episodes I had listened to kind of get ideas for today's episode, the speaker was saying that it could be called selfish to rob the person of the opportunity, and then the person who didn't get the help when they thought the other person, or assumed the other person would have just known to ask without them prompting, that person could also be classified as selfish. Like, how self-interested are you? You didn't see me struggling. And there is another reel that I saw recently that it was, well, how, oh, I had no clue you were struggling, why didn't you reach out? And then in some ways it's like, well, some people did see you struggling and they didn't offer. That's like a Venn diagram. There's the
Sure.
I'm struggling and others don't know I'm struggling. That could be rather on you to ask for help. It could also be on others politely to offer.
Yeah.
When other people are offering and you're denying the help that they're giving because you don't want to burden them, that's like one piece. And maybe they don't overlap, but it's like kind of a chart in my mind. That middle piece is when people know that you are struggling, or you voiced before, I would like help with this, even if you don't directly ask that time, and the person knowingly withholds it. That's the piece where, like, I think that category is the selfish person. When you know somebody needs help and they're struggling, you don't offer it, that's selfish. And in a different alternate way, when you know that you're struggling and this person said before, if you ever need anything, just reach out and let me know, then you're selfish for not, burdening, you're not actually, but like burdening the other person. The other person feeling burdened is on them if they were to, and if they choose to say yes to help when they would feel burden or resentment, that's still not your job to emotionally caretake or caregive, whatever, for that person. It's, you asked, they said yes, and the fallout of that is on them. If they begrudgingly said yes, that's on them. If they willingly said yes and really wanted to help you, that can actually further the bond and break out of that limiting belief. Oh, people are reliable. That's the goal I guide my clients towards. Let's try to identify what responsible, reliable people look like well in advance of help being asked. And when you do start to ask, start small. Could I have a glass of water? Could I, even when you're on the subway, like, oh, excuse me, could you move out of the way? Could you this? And now, because I'll be wearing her all the time when I'm like grocery shopping, there are times where I'm like, I drop something and I turn to the person next to me and was like, I'm so sorry to bother you. I am. I can't bend over to pick up what I just dropped. Would you mind helping me? I honestly haven't had one person be like, no, suffer alone with your kid. Like, literally everybody has been like, of course, no problem. And some people will even just offer without me having to ask, and then I'll say thank you. So I think that makes a big difference. Like, are you aware enough in your surroundings that it's okay to ask even random strangers for help? And once you get past that fear, it does get easier to ask the people closer to you for help. The emotions might be icky, but the literal ask, how to ask, that does get easier.
Well, every time that you ask, you actually, it's almost like another shoring up of realizing you have intrinsic value.
Yes.
I am worth actually helping.
Yes.
People actually see me. Like, my identity is not something that just drifts into the oblivion based off of the success or failure of the last thing that I've done. And so, sometimes it's the hardest part is accepting the help. Why? Because then it reminds me that I'm not as powerful as I want to believe in my own life. Now, a lot of people that, like, if you work with me as a client, you're like, what do you mean, Adam? You always talk about stepping into your power and really filling the spot of your own, like, space of your sphere of influence. I think that the caveat there is I do think I have tremendous power and influence in my own life, but I'm not in a delusion where I think I control everything. I have power and I have influence. I can show up. I can make myself present. I do not dictate all the outcomes.
True.
Because some outcomes are outside of my hands. The
Yes.
only thing I can do is make myself present to try to have the most influence in the way and the direction that certain things happen.
Yes. I think the differentiation between control and influence is also important for hyper independent, do it all type
Mhm.
people who are, frankly, far more familiar with having everything in control all the time, and feeling out of control
Yeah,
is uncomfortable. So, differentiating between control and influence, that's something I worked on in EMDR as well when navigating co parenting. It There's much less in my control now than there used to be. However, that doesn't mean I have no control. It also doesn't mean I have no influence. And it's
yeah,
learning how to ask, hey, here's the value, here's the purpose for health or safety, here's just the, the fact of the
yeah,
matter. I'm not trying to control. Like, a good example I think of this is shoes in the house. I do not wear
mm,
shoes in my house. I can't control other people
yeah,
wearing shoes in their house, but what I can control is having them put shoes out of her
mm,
line of sight when she crawls. What I
yeah,
can control is making sure, as much as I'm able to, like a request, could you wash your hands before she eats? I can
yeah,
control washing all of her stuff when she comes back. Like, there's things I can control, but I can't control
yeah,
everything. And I have influence if I learn to ask in a way that is
mm,
direct and purposeful and doesn't feel like too intense or like I'm trying to control the
yeah,
situation. It's like I would like congruency for her. Would be great if you could follow it. And then
yeah,
if it doesn't happen, obviously, if there's more serious health or safety things, that's when you scale up in DBT. That's when you increase the intensity of the ask. So there's like a chart where it's like intensity of saying no and intensity of an ask. And it gives you examples. What is the situation and how is the person
yep,
responding? And if you feel it's appropriate to start around a 2 or a 3, usually most requests or no's can stay around there. But if you're dealing with
mm,
a difficult person or somebody who takes advantage or doesn't know how to ask for help,
mhm.
that's when looking up and like increasing those scales of intensity can help you to
Oh,
understand,
for sure.
oh, I'm not powerless. It's just around this number, I feel as though I have more control and influence. But when I deal with people who make me ramp up to saying no at a 10 or
Hmm.
asking and imploring essentially at a 10, then I have to exert my influence in a different way. That, yes, the other
Hmm.
person might feel like you're trying to control them, but again, that's that their own agency. If you're perceiving someone's request as
Yeah.
them controlling you, that's on you to do your own work to not feel controlled by others, or to be more
Mm,
responsible so others don't feel like they have to control you. I think that's like the purpose of the chart too.
absolutely. I mean, to try to bring it down again to something that's uh, increasingly tangible is, I think right now, like this is going to post after the election.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
election has a lot of people that are like, oh my God, well, so what a great example of power and influence, right?
Yes.
So, like, neither one of us is going to dictate the outcome of
No.
what this election is going to be, but we can be present. We
Yes.
can let that power and influence be experienced, right?
Hmm.
And letting our voices be heard. Now, here's the other side of it. Whatever happens in the election, whether your side wins, my side wins,
Right.
whatever
Whatever
it
it
is,
is.
that doesn't mean that then all of a sudden we're abdicated from a responsibility to utilize the spheres of our influence. Like,
Yes.
I something that I always laugh about with people, because I come from a very conservative background, is like, okay, so let me outline this. Under Biden, I started my own business. Under Biden, I made my first six figures. Under Biden, I bought my first house. Fuck, I'm a bad conservative. Like, wait a second, this is supposed to be miserable. This dude was supposed to screw my life over, right? But these are those limiting beliefs. So we go,
Right.
oh, well, because someone exists or because some uh, potential challenge is on the horizon, then that should limit me being able to be present and use my power and use my influence in my own life.
Not so.
And it's not so. And that's, I mean, just think about it. None of us have the ability to sit out our lives for 4 years at a time until we think that the board is set for our advantage. And
No.
so,
Yeah.
but this is again a trauma response,
Correct.
because if I sit there and I say I'm powerless, then I can accept less for myself. And that rolls right into like our third topic,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is when we want more for ourselves than others that are willing to accept or want for themselves. So this is
Hmm.
the dichotomy that pops into this situation of when we're extremely, I just coined the term of like when we're high performance, high pack impact individuals, we can will things to happen. It's like a
True.
blessing and a curse, right?
True.
Like we can create our own business, we can put together a
Yeah.
business plan, we can find the financing, we can pay our bills, we can get to financial freedom, whatever it might be. But what happens is we start getting into a position that we feel like we are not limited by outside situations.
Right.
Now, something that goes on top of this is we start to be a lighthouse for other people.
Yeah.
When people see you being successful in whatever you do, maybe it's your personal life, your professional life, your love life, whatever it is, people are they gravitate to it. I want what they have, right? And this is what's interesting is then we get into relationships, and I'm going to use a phrase, and please don't everyone trauma on me, but we get into relationships that are unequally yoked.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is you will have a very productive, very high performance individual that has very high expectations for themselves, who will get yoked with someone else who likes all of those thought processes, but doesn't actually want to do the work to get there.
Right.
And this is when the resentment starts, because at the beginning it's like the church camp high. We're in a relationship, there's romance, everything's going fine, everything's going good, until that high performance individual in the relationship starts leveraging the other one. Hey, I want to save more. Hey, I can't wait to buy that first rental property. Hey, I want to do this. I'm thinking we're going to send the kids to private school, so that's going to require us to have two incomes, or we're going to have to do
Mm-hmm.
this, or we're. And all of a sudden, the other person said, "Well, wait a second. I thought I was like riding on the like laurels of your coattails. So like I now have to show up more. Yeah, wait a second. There's more required from me
More? No,
than
thank you.
any other relationship in my
Mm-hmm.
life. Like, and this is where you start to see the cracks in the foundation, because this
Yes.
other individual has normally been emboldened by their family of origin,
Yes.
because not a lot has been expected out of them. They haven't been leveraged in those ways. And when they have been, they have found ways to be avoidant in this. So
Yes.
a lot of times it doesn't start off as like the massive break in the dam. What ends up happening is you start with these little cracks in the foundation until they build up to, wait a second, I didn't actually ask this question in the beginning of my relationship. Do you want to be with me because you like the ideas of what my life will provide us, or do
Mm-hmm.
you wish to be in a relationship with me where we collaborate to hit these goals together?
And because it's me. Yeah.
Because it's me.
Yeah. To the people listening who are like, but we should always optimize and maximize and everything. I get it. I'm like that
Yep.
too. Not as much since having a kid. I will say it leveled me out in many ways, but that level and desire and drive for
Mhm.
optimization to be the best, to be an exemplar, etc., can be in some ways robbing you of some of the power you have or some of the influence you have over your own mood and your own psyche of what would be
Mhm.
the worst case scenario you are fearing if you lose control, which again, control is an illusion. So even reframing it as if you do not have as much influence as you would like over others and their lack of drive comparative to your hyperdrive, how can you tolerate the discomfort? How can you cope with other
Mhm.
people not being a maximizer or an optimizer in the same way you are? And what would it look like if you stopped projecting onto others what should be and accept what is? And I think that is another hard part of it that ties into the limiting beliefs we've explored. Well, what, and I took this training a long time ago, and one of the questions they had asked when you're doing shadow work was like, what is the
Mhm.
tragedy about somebody who lives that way, and what do you think happens to their soul when they
Yeah.
die? So a very deep existential question. And I think that lets people into why are they so judgmental of others who don't want more for themselves? Why is it frustrating? Onefold, because if I want more for all of us and I'm the only one doing all the work, I'll be exhausted and I'll feel burned out. The other part of it is if I want more for others and they don't want more for themselves, then
Mhm.
what am I left with? Do I sacrifice and compromise myself to go on a lower echelon? Do I
Yeah.
feel like I'm sacrificing and compromising myself to try to drag them up to my echelon? again, it's lonely at the top. It is difficult to find people who are, whether that's friendship wise, business wise, romantically, equally yoked, because society has often functioned off of the balance of under functioners and over functioners, morning people and night people. I'm trying to think of like other balances, but those are
Yeah.
the top two that jump into my mind. We have a template set in some ways to counterbalance one another. However, when it comes to a relationship, friendship or relationship, oftentimes that counterbalance needs to be more articulated than it currently is. A lot of the times, over functioning women that I work with who are extremely hyper independent and self reliant view, mostly subconsciously at the start, that they are doing what they're doing because they're modeling for the other person how they want to eventually be taken care of when the roles reverse or when things change or when they have a kid or what have you. And then that actually happens, and then they're burdened with even more. And the other person who is under functioning, no one ever told them no, and no one
Yep.
reprimanded them, right? So they had no consequence. They're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to help more. And the person's like, drowning. Well, I don't want to do it all. Well, you did such a good job at doing it all. I just thought you'd keep wanting to do it all forever. This is
Yeah.
also a case for, let's lower the self-reliance and hyper independence, learn to ask for help, learn to set a different tone where you are capable of providing for yourself and relying on yourself, and maybe just as much comfortable with asking for help from others, but knowing deep down
Absolutely.
you've got you. It's not to say that the antithesis or the kind of the polar opposite is true, that like I'm the only one I can rely on doesn't shift into I can only rely on others. It shifts into a sweet middle ground of, there are things that I actually don't want to ask for help from others because it's
Absolutely.
necessary or functional for me to do them my way. There's my inner circle that I'm not going to trust with just anybody or at all. And there's my outer circle that I can start to be more flexible and less rigid with, knowing full well if I need to, I can go back to me or to pay somebody for whatever the help is that's needed. That's the middle ground, is how to honor I'm comfortable relying on myself and I'm comfortable relying on others and asking them for help. And I know how to emotionally cope with the sometimes felt sense of disappointment when I feel let down.
Well said.
That's my 2 cents on that. And if you are, now petty me is coming out, if you are dating somebody or in a friendship with somebody who is okay with, or even like when I'm glad I own my own business, but I have now other roles that I've experienced over the years, or even before that when I was like a trainee and an associate, where you're working for bosses or what have you, that you're like, oh, you don't care, like there's no, you're happy with middle management, as I used to be told in grad school. Not about me, but when I was dating this one guy. And there was not, it wasn't a diss when I was saying that to him. It was really like, I kind of came to terms with like, that's the ceiling. Like you don't want to go for more because your level of more was achieved just now by doing what you did with like the management position. I get that. And I was impressive. There was a raise, whatever else, but they were like, I'm good. Like that was all they wanted. And I'm like, I can't be with somebody that's like that. And if I had stayed, we would have fought and he would have felt like such a small person, which is not on him. That's totally on me, because I can't force or control somebody else to want what I want or to go after it the way I would go after it. Ideally, the best thing you can do is try to find somebody who's already aligned in their own way of being on that path. And then you can figure out how to make that work where you're both driven. But many of the couples and friendships I've seen, it's like a lack of drive and motivation. There's a mismatch that often causes a lot of the conflict. Well, why can't you do more? Well, why can't you do less? Well, why can't you do it this way? Well, why can't you stop expecting? There's this fight for the other person to be more like me, when in reality, the goal is, how can I take a scoop of how they are, a scoop of how I am, and we can meet in the middle. It's like driving, the art of compromise. When I'm in the driver's seat, don't touch the radio. When you're in the driver's seat, I won't touch the radio. Or we listen in silence, right? Those are your three options for compromise. But I'm not going to then be overstepping and putting my hand over the line of demarcation and being like, well, I don't like the song, I'm going to change it. But what I could do is put my own headphones in. What I could do is get out a book and read, right? That's me coping with not having control of the radio, but I still have influence over my mood and trying to advocate for myself. Or I could say, would you mind, because I'm going to put mine in, could you just turn it down one click? Right? Like, I think that's a key there. Not every time is it like synced on the AC where like you both have to be sitting in 60 degrees. Unsync it, put yours at your desired temperature, like sleep number your life, basically. Do as much as you can to be comfortable with what you have.
Compromise doesn't mean that you're living with less than.
Correct.
So like,
Correct.
I think that we all hear compromise as being such a negative aspect, and it doesn't have to be, because the compromise is like, still have your ice cream, but they don't like pistachio, they're going to have vanilla.
Right.
Because it doesn't have to be, my significant other is limiting my joy, or it's about trying to control me. It's also about like, why would I force someone to essentially have a negative response or not to have joy by me because I want them to like the same things I do.
Yes.
But going back to what you were talking about, where there's like inherent roles built into all of these, this is why like premarital counseling is really good, because we need to understand, wait a second, what is the relationship that we're actually getting into when we're actually fusing to each other? Is
Before
this
you
one of the
do it.
things where
Yeah.
so you're the prize pony, go get all the money,
Yeah.
someone's going to take care of the house? Are you good with that? Or, well, wait a second, I thought that this person was coming in my life to make my life easier. I
Right.
wasn't going to have to work so hard.
Right.
Well, no, there's going to be needs that are going to pop up. There's going to be kids, there's going to be a house, there's going to be a dog, there's going to be a parrot, there's going to be things that are coming in. Oh, well, wait a second. Well, why didn't we have that question? Like, why didn't we talk about that? Or don't come to me as a couples therapist and say, well, my significant other doesn't want to go get a job, doesn't want to. Well, was that ever something that was leveraged on them from the beginning of the relationship? Well, no, it wasn't. Oh, okay.
I
So
just thought they would.
their
I
status.
would. Right. I would. So why wouldn't they?
But so, the thing that I hear all the time is like, well, I thought that he would turn into a grown ass man. Well, why would it when you married a man child? Like, it doesn't. Same Pokemon. You don't hit enough points and then evolve. So,
right? That would be ideal, but that doesn't always happen.
If you marry the frat boy, don't be surprised that the frat boy is a frat boy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we talked about a little last episode too.
Yeah.
That it's like best summarized, and this I understand is like a heterotypical stereotype that I'm about to say, but it's mostly true. If you fall into that class, that's true. That men marry women hoping they don't change, and women marry men hoping they do change.
Yep.
Well, if he could just this, if he just loved me, if he just no, and that's why having those tough, compromising conversations in the beginning. What works for you and how do you operationally define what that is? It's best done before you get attached and fall in love. Once we've talked about this, once you get attached and fall in love, it will be a struggle to ask for help or to accept the disappointment or to be comfortable with the limiting belief. And then you're just learn to tolerate, well, I guess the people I love don't want to be there for me. That might not be so, especially if you've mastered how to ask. It's the navigating who to ask. Knowing this ahead of time, this person is incapable or undesiring of meeting this need. Why would I stay? And you won't know that unless you ask or unless you try to uncover that, especially in premarital counseling. And I don't think couples should wait to be engaged. If you think you're going to get engaged and you're discussing spending the rest of your life together, you could even just book a small, like 5 or 6 sessions. Let's have one session on each topic. The topic, common ones, in-laws, finances, household roles, long-term goals. Then there's obviously some other ones from depending on the program that you use, but there are necessary. Conflict is one of them too. Like, how do you want to navigate this? Let's test it out in the confines of session. And if you don't get through it then, or it uncovers like, oh crap, we really shouldn't be together, you actually did the right thing. You really did, because you don't want to be stuck with someone or feel as though you have to be stuck with somebody where, like we mentioned earlier, to kind of wrap this up, it's all on me and it's my job to ask for help with everything being all on me. Wouldn't you want to know that was the role you were going to be assigned before you chose it? Absolutely. Or I'm with somebody who is so hyper independent, they can never ask for help, but they constantly snap at me for not doing enough, even though I'm totally willing to help them, but I just don't. Or I have done it without them having to ask, and then I get criticized for it being wrong, or they're mad at me because I tell them, please just ask, right? Like, don't you want to know that ahead of time before you settle in with somebody, so that when those moments come up, you navigate it with ease and you can enjoy your healthy, secure relationship, not get the ick from the stability like we talked about last time. You want to have that to look forward to, not to feel like it's being threatened for going, or like kind of in at risk of going away or being threatened, because conflict can be confronting for couples. Best to do it ahead of time. I recommend premarital before couples get engaged. Truly, like that's
Oh,
when you should ask for
absolutely.
help.
I mean, what you're saying like goes hand in hand with stuff I've said before in the past, which is if you don't have that level of emotional intimacy and security, you're also not having the greatest physical intimacy. Like,
Very true.
and the studies show it. The
Yeah.
studies show that our sex lives are vastly improved when we emotionally feel very rooted and connected with the
Yes.
person we are in a relationship with.
Yes.
So, like, if you start getting into the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, I mean, it would probably be good that you've had these conversations.
Yes.
Like, hey, as this progresses, what does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
What does my role in your life look like? What are your expectations of me in your life?
What do you
Like,
want from what do you expect from a partner? If I weren't your partner,
exactly.
like I want you to answer this like I'm not in the room, right? Like so I tell couples to ask themselves,
Danger.
what do you want? What are your hopes and expectations of a relationship, not
Mhm.
only of your role, but of the role of the person you'd be in it with? I give them a list of like 10 to 12 questions. And what are you wanting and what are you willing to both give and receive? And that's a key differentiator is if I want this, like the same with asking for help, this
Mhm.
actually ties our episode up nicely. I could want somebody to cook me a 7-course meal, but I'd be willing to accept a hamburger helper. Right? Like where is your upper and lower limit of
Yep.
like wanting and willing? Not only does that guide your relationship choices, when you're asking for help, that can be part of how you ask
Mhm.
for help. Hey, I would love it if you could grab me a glass of water. And let's say I'm really assertive, which I am, and I can advocate, I really love sparkling water if you have any. Otherwise, tap water would do just fine. And they go,
Mhm.
okay. So honestly, I've just set them up. No matter which option they give me, they're winning.
Yeah.
That's how you ask for help. Is not like, if you don't give me any water or else. First of all, that's not asking for help. That's giving an ultimatum. Like that's just
Yeah.
jumping. Most people think like, oh, I'm asking for help. No, you're jumping right to an ultimatum. You need to learn how to
Statement.
ask for help, right? Give me the water or else. Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah. No,
okay.
actually I will not. Yeah. So I think that's a key wrap up point
Oh,
is
yeah.
learning how to ask is important. Learning to have those compromise conversations are important, and understand before you partner with somebody, are they the type to be so self-reliant they won't
Absolutely.
ask for help, or are they the type to not want to offer the help when they see that you need it most?
Mic drop.
Yeah. And if
Well,
you
so we're
struggle with this, let us know. Email
yeah, I
us.
mean, we're
Yeah.
sitting by looking for the
Yep.
text message, the emails, and the DMs.
Yep.
So drop us a hint, and we'll continue to make these.
Yes. And then if you have like we said, if you have any like questions or success stories of this, or if we've given
Yeah.
you advice on any episode and you're like, oh my gosh, it worked, or if you liked my hype up single moms episode from 2 episodes ago where I ranted about cheating, just let us know what you like. Adam gets more, I think you get more of the DMs and texts than I do. I fear I come off too abrasive, that I'm not approachable, that they're like afraid of me, which in some parts is good, but in other parts, like I'm a very approachable person. I want to
You
hear what
are.
you like and don't like about the episode. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Reach out
DM
to
both of
her.
us.
Stop
Yeah.
sending me all the goddamn
At
messages.
Talia Bombola, please. I would love to hear
Yeah.
from you.
At Wild Ethos Counseling.
All right. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Between Two Clinicians. We would so appreciate if this episode resonated with you, for you to share it with somebody, and also find your favorite podcast platform and like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. We would love to attract more listeners just like you and have this message be spread to whoever needs it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.